So, this will be part two of the key events in the French Revolution. And in this little mini episode, we're going to see increasing tensions and things go from okay to really, really bad. So, in the last couple of videos, I've recapped some of the key events leading up to King Louis and his family's flight to Varennes. So, if you would like a quick recap of those, you can go watch the earlier videos. But for today, I want to pick up with King Louis's decision in 1791 to escape house arrest. Again, he and his family were forced to move from the Palace of Versailles to the city of Paris in the Tuileries Palace, and they had been living under house arrest for about 2 years. And during those 2 years, King Louis was still the king, but he was slowly signing away his power to the National Assembly, or the Tennis Court of People. So in June of 1791, King Louis decides that he still really wants to be king of France, and he decides to escape to Austria to try to raise an army. And unfortunately, it was a very poorly planned event. The king and his family dressed as servants and then took a fancy carriage to the border of Austria. They get caught in the town of Varennes, and the king and his family are brought back to Paris. And from that point on, the French people really just don't trust him anymore, and they see him more as a problem. And roughly a year later, as the revolution continues and the leaders are trying to establish new rights and new rules for the country, France ends up declaring war on Austria. So, as you can imagine, not every single person in France was excited about the changes that were happening. A lot of former nobles were upset at their loss of privileges. A lot of people in the southern part of France and in the countryside didn't really like the changes. And so they're going to start reaching out to the nobles of other countries and the kings of other countries to attack France. And even though there's a lot of debate among the revolutionary leaders, France ends up going to war with Austria. And the map you're looking at, France is in blue, France's allies are in purple, and then you can see that pretty much the rest of Europe is red. The red countries are the enemies of France, and they're the ones who go to war with France. And this is called the First Coalition. And so pretty much France is fighting the rest of Europe and defending their revolutionary ideas. And the rest of Europe is willing to go to war with France for kind of two reasons. One, they're afraid of the French Revolution spreading to their own countries where kings would be overthrown by the people. So they want to stop the revolution before it can spread. And then two, up until this time, France had been one of the most powerful countries in Europe. It was very wealthy. It had one of the largest populations. They had a lot of colonies and raw goods. And the rest of Europe saw this as an opportunity to kind of take down one of the bigger, more powerful countries in Europe when it was at its weakest point. So they're kind of going to leap at that opportunity to take France down. So again, that's why so many countries in Europe were willing to go to war against France. And unfortunately, in the summer of 1792, the war goes badly for France, leading to mass panic. Again, France is still in debt. There's still bread shortages and all sorts of problems. So you can imagine feeding and paying an army is not going to go well. People are going to be reluctant to fight. So it's just going to go badly, and we start to see mass panic. And the enemies of France cross the border and come closer and closer to Paris. And in September of 1792, that same year, we actually see what's called the September massacres that happen over a span of a couple of days. And as the enemies of France draw closer to Paris, mass groups of the city poor in Paris just go absolutely nuts, and they storm a prison that's just stuffed full of prisoners, and they just massacre them. So they're going to beat them up, tear them apart, rape the women, all sorts of bad stuff. And they do that to people who were in prison for being enemies of the revolution. So, like priests and members of the First Estate, some nobles who hadn't fled France yet, and then poor peasants who just kind of were in the wrong place at the wrong time and were accused of being enemies. So the 1,000 to 1,500 people who were just brutally massacred over these couple days were waiting for a trial, and were just attacked by mobs of angry peasants. So it's kind of like a little blight on the timeline of the French Revolution, but you can kind of see panic setting in and people becoming very afraid. And in the following year, in January, Maximilien Robespierre, one of the leaders of the revolution, decides that in order to survive, the French Revolution needs to behead the former king of France. So he ends up putting King Louis on trial, and the only thing they really have to debate is how should he be punished, and the decision is he needs to be executed. So King Louis is executed by guillotine. Later on, his wife Marie Antoinette will also be executed by guillotine. But the king is killed, and later that year, the Committee of Public Safety is founded. And so the thing to remember leading into next class is, even though there's a list of rules for the new government, even though there's a list of rights for the people, France still has problems. Again, they're still fighting the rest of Europe. There are enemies of the revolution within France. Again, people who aren't going to want to see the revolution succeed. They want their old privileges back. So the power is really kind of taken away from the representatives of the people, and it's given to something called the Committee of Public Safety. And the Committee of Public Safety is a group of just a handful of men who are really in charge of everything. And Maximilien Robespierre leads this committee. So the committee is founded in April, and then the committee makes decisions to try to save France. So what they're going to end up doing is they're going to take away rights of the people. So again, the point of the revolution was bringing rights and equality and a sense of fairness and justice in France. And then the leaders take all of that away. So they're going to do a couple of things. They're going to make a couple of laws. The first one is mass conscription, where they force people to fight or support the war effort. So anyone who, like any young man, was forced to go fight as a soldier. Women and married men or older men were forced to make supplies, help in the hospitals. Children made bandages. Old men were supposed to inspire others to fight, but the whole goal is that the entire country of France is supporting the war effort against the rest of Europe. On top of that, there was a new law called the Law of Suspects, which had the same mentality of, if you're not for us, you're against us. So the Law of Suspects reads as, anyone who, by their behavior, comments, or writing, shows that they do not support the revolution, any public official who has already been sacked for being unpatriotic, and any former members of the aristocracy or nobility and their families who have not clearly supported the changes of the revolution. So if you were not a gung-ho supporter of the revolution, wearing the red, white, and blue, denouncing others, if you were not a supporter, you were considered an enemy and you were sent to the guillotine. And then another pretty important law, again, writing a new constitution and beheading the king isn't going to stop the issues of famine and bread shortages. So there were still bread shortages, and the Committee of Public Safety made a law kind of forbidding the hoarding of bread, and they made a law that bread prices could not go above a certain amount. So again, they're trying to pretty strictly control the people of France, so they're taking away a lot of rights. And the punishment for breaking these rules was public beheading by guillotine. And we will pick up with that on next class.